Welcome to Dialogue Unbound, where we explore the intersections of Mormonism, current events, and scholarly thought. I'm Caroline Kline, one of the editors of Dialogue, a journal of Mormon thought.
And I'm Daniel Foster Smith, the production editor at Dialogue.
Today, we are diving into a show that has sparked equal parts fascination, discomfort, and debate. This is The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, and season 3 will be premiering on November 13th. This series offers a glossy, curated glimpse into the lives of LDS women in Utah, with storylines full of domestic drama, religious subtext, and carefully filtered images of perfection. But beneath the reality TV sparkle, the show opens up deeper questions about how gender is performed and policed in Mormon culture. What does it reveal about consumerism, female relationships, sexuality, beauty culture, and breadwinning in the heartland of Mormon culture? How much of that performance is about authenticity or survival in a culture that still prizes a particular image of womanhood? To help us unpack all of this, we are thrilled to welcome two guests who have been following this show. We have writer and independent scholar and co-author of 50 Years of Exponent 2, Katie Rich. And we also have with us former director of the Mormon Women Oral History Project and former Exponent 2 blogger, Elizabeth Johnson. Let's just dive in and talk about this show. I actually only started watching it a few weeks ago, and it certainly does raise a lot of questions in my mind, and I would love your insight on all of this. So first question for me is, how do you guys think of this show? Of course, it's in a long line of shows of pop culture portrayals of Mormon women. Like we had Big Love a couple decades ago, Under the Banner of Heaven more recently. Of course, there's always like the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. What do you think? Is this show primarily voyeuristic entertainment, or do you think it actually genuinely engages with questions of faith, gender, and modernity? And Katie, how about we start with you?
Yeah, so of course this show is voyeuristic, right? That's not really in question. And of course it intersects with consumerism and all of those things that you were just mentioning. But the way that it's set up, and there's lots of different types of reality shows. And, there's competition shows where you vote someone off, and there's shows where you all go live together, like Real World on MTV back in my teen days that I was so fascinated with. But this show creates conditions that bring people together who, are living their independent lives and their independent businesses. But there's lots of events for the sake of filming. And so you bring people together in these kind of artificial social settings that are created for the sake of content, and see how their relationships and real lives play out. And so there's that voyeuristic element where we're invited into these settings to watch the drama unfold. But as that happens, I think we do capture a lot of real questions about faith, gender, modernity, and the pressures of Mormon women and Mormon lives in Utah today. I think you capture the authentic while setting up the artificial and voyeuristic situations.
Mm-hmm. Liz, how about you? How do you think of this show?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Katie. I think it is fundamentally, I still think even if it's curated settings or whatever, it is still storytelling. It's still very much these people's real lives to some extent. And so like, sure, the story is curated, but that's the same that happens, with any kind of story, right? With any novel or memoir or whatever, you're still kind of curating this narrative. And so the narrative that they are letting us into, are allowing us some glimpse of, I think is actually, it messes with that binary, I think, a little bit of like real life versus fake life, that I think is actually really a good thing. Like how much of it is fact, how much of it is fiction, like even against too, like a Mormon versus non-Mormon binary that I think is really interesting. I can't tell you how many people I saw on social media when this show very first came out posting, this is why these people do not represent me, or, all these different things, this like I feel like in Mormonism, there really very much is like an in-out binary. And this show, for better or worse, because it does kind of engage with questions of faith and gender and belonging and kind of how you perform your Mormonism, really does kind of break down those binaries in a way that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I'd say one of the most catchy parts of the show for me as I've been watching it is how these characters, these women, these mom talk influencers, like, are able to hold both of those things seemingly at the same time. And I actually don't see like a tremendous amount of angst in them as they are holding these sort of like opposing views. But I see these women in the show seemingly, and again, this is, we know it's a performance, but the moments that crack through don't, of like, complexity seem to be about like, their relationships to each other and that all mixing in. But seemingly their Mormonism doesn't seem to be a point of conflict. Most of them seem to be able to hold peacefully, it seems. I'm a Mormon and I'm going to perform a type of Mormonism in this moment that is different than the Mormonism that maybe you're used to seeing. And so I wonder if we could dig into like the performance of it and look at, what is their performance of Mormonism? Where is it coming from? Did they learn it? Are they creating something wholly new, or is this part of that Mormon moment?
Yeah, I see them engage with questions of how Mormon you are in that first season, where there's a lot of tension of sinners versus saints. And that kind of centers around Jen and Zach Affleck having a baby blessing and who gets invited to the blessing with Zach's seemingly active Mormon family, right? And who is in and who is out based on what guidelines here, right? Like, who gets to be allowed to be Mormon enough to be at an ordinance like this? And is it about your friendship with Jen and Zach, whether you're close enough friends to them personally, or is it about your performance of Mormonism and how well you can seamlessly blend into a setting where when you show up to a Mormon event, you're not necessarily, like, if you're just in a sacrament meeting or at someone's house at this, like, post ritual event, you're not presenting your tuple recommend to be just present, but how you appear is going to tell something about your relationship to the rules of Mormonism and how you show up. And so they do play on that, and that creates tension there. And then they get to play on it more and capitalize on it. Like, I think Jesse has started selling like Sinners vs. Saint merch, where that becomes, a party that they have in season 2 where they have a fight is the Sinners vs. Saints merch. And you show up dressed as an angel or a devil based on your performance of Mormonism and what you want to claim in that moment.
I was going to say, I think it's so interesting, specifically that piece about performing Mormonism and how you show up and how you appear, because 95% of this show, the women appear like physically in terms of their dress and their hair and their makeup and everything so similar. And it's not necessarily like based on the Mormonism, again, I grew up with, it's not a more traditional, you see shoulders, you see, like it's not obvious, like garment covering clothing, for example. And yet there is very much this, like you said, sinners versus saints and who gets to have it. And everybody is swearing, which again, not something that is a traditional, Mormon coded behavior. It almost seems to only fall along the line of like who drinks alcohol or who, again, sometimes pray. Like, it's so interesting to me for a show that has the Mormon word in the title, how actually very little of like the Mormon behaviors that I have become accustomed to actually show up. Like, there's an occasional prayer, there is the baby blessing piece. It seems like occasionally they're interviewed about, like, is Halloween acceptable? Like, what is Halloween in Mormonism? These types of things, or like sex toy parties or whatever. But they really, it almost seems to be very much like Daniel was saying, like not really a source of angst or anything. They're like, I'm just living my life. And because I'm living my life and I am Mormon, this is what Mormonism looks like for me.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting question, and it also brings to mind for me the way they can kind of hold two things at once. They can swear and wear whatever clothes they want, but also, some of them embrace an active LDS identity. And one of those other things that also, might cause tension for some people, is their feminism. And I use that with a question mark. So that's one thing I was hoping to talk to you guys about. I think one of the women, Demi, at one point talks about how, like, this show and her mom talk thing, that part of the goal at least is to smash the patriarchy. I think she says that a couple times. And I was hoping we could like step back and reflect on that for a minute. And Katie, I was hoping first maybe you could tell us a little bit about, quickly about the various waves of Mormon feminism. And then I would love to hear from both of you, and you too, Daniel, about how these women's actions fall into some kind of category of feminism, and are they enacting a newer type of Mormon feminism? Is this the next wave of Mormon feminism? Is this in any way empowerment? Let's think about this idea of empowerment, patriarchy, and feminism, and I'll throw it to you first, Katie, to kind of tell us a little bit about the history of Mormon feminism.
Yeah, so feminism is sometimes colloquially used to talk about women's empowerment or equality, and using that kind of on an individual level, but it's actually a political movement, and it requires kind of activism to try and structurally change systems, institutions, laws to then create better gender equality. And so within Mormonism, there's a few different ways, and there's lots of arguments about how there's been feminist impulses from the beginning. But when we look at it as a larger, more political movement, we're going to look at Mormon women engaging in the suffrage movement in the 19th century. And so in like the 1870s, and part of the original Woman's Exponent, which was a Utah-based publication, there was a lot of engagement in the state and national suffrage movement. And this was holding in tension the reality of a lot of Mormon women at that time either being polygamist wives or having to publicly support polygamy in order to stay in good relationship with church leaders. And so holding the paradox of their lives and then still advocating for legal extension of suffrage. So that's one of the biggest waves. And then when we get to the 1960s and 70s with what we call like kind of second wave feminism within the United States, and one of the elements of that was the Equal Rights Amendment, which became a big deal in 1972. Again, it was, introduced originally much earlier. But as there's this kind of national movement towards social, legal, economic equality and gaining additional rights for women, Mormons participated in that, and you see groups around the country, including the development of Exponent 2 in Boston, which became a national platform connecting all these different dispersed pockets of Mormon feminists who are engaging with these questions along with their identity as Mormon women. But then it becomes a big issue in the mid-1970s, in 1976, when the LDS Church comes out against the Equal Rights Amendment. And they join this right-wing coalition with Phyllis Schlafly to stop ERA, stop taking our privileges is what it stood for, stop ERA, and they used the ward network, the church network, to mobilize women to make it appear like a grassroots effort to help legally stop the passage of this constitutional amendment that was supposed to guarantee equal rights without, like, regardless of sex. And
by the way, for anyone who's interested in this fascinating moment of Mormon feminist history. Pedestals and Podiums by Martha Bradley is a great book that goes all into how the church mobilized these women.
Intense detail and great history there. And so that's the second big wave. And then it becomes this tension of not just Mormon women engaging in feminism, but doing so seemingly in conflict with the church. And that creates big challenges in the 1990s, when the church has this retrenchment and claims like feminist intellectuals and homosexuals as the three enemies of the church. And then there's this retrenchment that happens among feminists, it seems, when their identity as Mormons and feminists don't jive. So then the next big wave is online Mormon feminism, which of course Caroline Kline and Liz, you guys were both part of. As these discussions, there's this new generation who are interested in these same questions that people have been asking for decades, but it's new to them and to their lives, and they bring these conversations online, and it creates these opportunities to connect people for movements towards that structural equality. And there's new wave of arguments, not just about how Mormon women experience gender inequality in their individual lives, but how to communicate and work together towards making structural changes to different levels of success, depending on what we're looking at. And so then does like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives relate to feminism and a new wave of feminism? I might be inclined to think that they are more actively subverting gender roles, traditional gender roles presented to them, rather than engaging in a feminist movement towards structural change. And so individual empowerment, I think, matters, and it can then relate and lead to greater movements towards structural change, but it's not in itself inherently trying to make structural changes in a feminist movement.
Liz, what do you think? What do you think? Is this empowerment? Is this Mormon feminism?
I mean, I think there is some amount of taking back on the personal level as opposed to the structural level, like Katie was talking about. There's something about taking back your sense of authority and where you're going to, derive your basis for decision making, and taking that away from like church leaders and being like, it doesn't matter to me that, they're saying this, that, or the other, that I'm going to do this my way. I do think there is something very powerful in that. And also, it's so funny to me because I've been rewatching season 1 and season 2 to get ready for this. And they talk over and over about Mom Talk being all about like women supporting women and, feminism and smashing the patriarchy. And I'm like, and it's just, it's dancing and like, or like lip syncing over existing audio on TikTok. Like, it's so funny to me because I don't totally understand. I think their lives are examples of ways to like behave in feminist ways, or, like to kind of, I don't know, embrace their own autonomy, but the actual like, and the raising of their own money, I think, is a feminist act too. But like, it's so funny to me because it's not really about like, bringing on like female entrepreneurs and like highlighting their products, or, there's not like all this, like, again, there's not community engagement. It's just sort of like, we, through like a male gaze, like we're going to be, like every time they greet each other, it's all about like, hey, you look so good. It's not, hey, how are you doing? It's, hey, you look so hot. And it's this very interesting, like, we're going to be pretty and hot, and we're going to dance on these videos and make a lot of money about it. And that's women supporting women. Yeah. And it's very interesting.
I think that is one of the things that breaks through to the real cultural commentary, right? So Utah has again been voted the worst state in the United States towards gender equality. What does that mean? Like, we have lower on average rates of women, not just starting college, but graduating from college. They're more likely to drop out of college than in a lot of other states. And most of Utah is really a childcare desert. And so when you have generations of Mormon women who have been taught kind of since this like post World War II retrenchment back to the home and this engagement in this right wing focus on the family type style of what is appropriate womanhood, and that is being a stay-at-home mom. And of course, that is very class coded and it's very privilege based to have this model, but it also means that women in general, but also Mormon women, have had more difficult access to avenues of being breadwinners. And so Mormon women are very susceptible to MLMs, right? Multi-level marketing schemes, where the idea is that you can work from home and still be the homemaker and the caretaker of children when you don't have access to anybody to help watch children. And the assumption is that if you are married, that you have a partner who is off working. And so influencer culture becomes a way that Mormon women can actually make money while still staying at home and being the primary caretakers of their children. And once they reach a certain level, they are actually like, it's hard work to learn how to produce content. It develops a lot of skills, takes a lot of time. And especially if you become successful and start getting brand deals, you're managing a lot and you become your own small business in this influencer culture. And so it seems ironic, and yet it is because of this system where women have a hard time accessing other avenues towards making money and being independent and being financially able to support themselves or their families. What avenues do they have? Multi-level marketing schemes, influencer culture. Like, they are living the challenge of being a multi-generational Mormon woman in Utah.
As you were talking about, I think the financial component, the capital, is kind of at the heart of this, because in some ways, and in thinking about, is this feminism? Is it a political feminism even? Because in some ways, these are women who, by virtue of being women in Mormonism or in the LDS context, are not given power, is not given the power of the priesthood, this traditional power that is held within the church. But in other ways, they, I feel, have usurped the real power in their spaces by seizing the money. You know, they've grabbed onto the capital that is available to them, and it's ironic because the way that they have found to get that money to become wealthy, or to become like the breadwinners, is by performing this type of Mormon mom feminism, Mormonism, that is at once like saying the words of like, smash the patriarchy, be powerful, but then, as you noted, Liz, it is still performing this type of femininity, which is hyper focused on presentation and looks. And so it's sort of like, is what's winning this argument here by them saying the words of like, we are feminists, but we are performing this sort of, you know, this image of like aesthetic fealty to this Utah mom culture. And ultimately, another comment that I just wanted to make, because it feels to me so at the heart of Mormon, at the heart of Mormonism too, is this sort of like entrepreneurial spirit. And as I was watching the show, one of the things that struck me most was I just kept thinking about Joseph Smith. I just kept thinking about him and all of his acolytes, and I was seeing what's the main one, the swinger, Taylor. Yes, I'm seeing her, and I'm thinking about Joseph Smith, and I'm seeing how she rises up and at the same time brings along these other people to be like, this is our space. And as it grows in influence, people start to disagree about, oh, well, what is mom talk? In the same way that early Mormons, I feel, I think we're saying, well, what is this? What is this church? What is this space? What are these communities all about? And as orthodoxy began to form, people, there was inside outside, but I ultimately just see them just like clawing for power and trying to be the most influential, and ironically by being influencers. So and I wonder if we can comment on like the fact that I think Taylor now has something like 5.8 million followers on TikTok, which obviously a follower on TikTok is different than a follower of a religion. And yet I find myself asking, does she have more followers than Joseph Smith ever had? Yeah. Are they religiously attuned to her? Are they loyal to her and her brand of whatever her religiosity is? Maybe not the same way, but it seems like that's a lot of power. That's a lot of influence.
Influencer culture is strange, right? Where what is the goal of social media? Scroll until you buy. Right? Like initially there was this feeling that we were on these apps, at least for me, because I graduated from high school in 2005, which is the year that Facebook started opening up to additional colleges. And initially you had to have like a certain university email address to be able to get a Facebook account. And, I joined at that time, and it's become what it is now in these last couple of decades. But initially for me, it felt like I was connecting with real people and people that I knew. And then over time, it changes where you aren't connecting so much with people you know in real life, but you are connecting to broader ideas, cultural movement. It's filtering what information you get, and it shapes how you start to view other people and the world. And there is increasingly that scroll until you buy. And when I follow people like Taylor, Frankie Paul, and really all of these people, because they live in Utah and I live in Utah. And so sometimes when they are advertising like, oh, this person came and detailed my car and I know that they live in my same county, I have actually then immediately is like, oh, I need that to happen too. I've been looking for a company. I then go and schedule that same car detailer to come to my house because I'm like, oh, like they're saying this is a good one and I've been looking for that. And so there's a certain amount of trust when like you become influenced, and it actually changes behavior in ways that we are sometimes conscious and sometimes not conscious of. They are advertising companies that I drive past all the time. Swig soda, like the last 15 years, these soda shops in Utah, like there's all these, every show, like every talk show that these women go on, they always want them to make a dirty soda with them, right? Like it's they think it's like this fun quirky thing, and it is a weird, like a quirky Utah thing, but it is a thing where I can drive 20 minutes and pass at least 10 Utah soda shops. So they have an actual influence that drives behavior. How does that relate to a religious figure? I don't think people are following them in the way, like there's been like academic studies of like how baseball is a religious experience. When you all go to a stadium and you follow a team and you root for your team and you have a certain belonging and it creates this subculture. I don't think they have that uniting power among followers where I feel personally connected to other followers of their show or themselves. But I do see that in following them, I am influenced in my behavior as well. So I don't think there's that religious, I view any one of them as someone who is going to relate to my salvation, but they may relate to what lipstick I buy.
I do think there is that piece when they fight it out on the show sometimes, where when Taylor goes and hosts the Country Music Awards or delivers an award, and then her friends don't comment or on her post, and so she calls them out in a post, and then it becomes fodder for the show later where they talk about, well, your followers came online and trashed me. They
Mhm.
called us all out because you have this loyal following who is going to do your bidding, whether you explicitly ask them to. So I do think there is that a quality of loyalty there.
That's
Yeah, I
interesting.
definitely. Well, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Just this online culture where it doesn't create a community where I feel in relationship to other followers of any of these people. But I think that that's an interesting element where those individual people can then deploy followers in sometimes dangerous or messy ways. Liz?
I was just going to say, I do think there's a certain amount of parasocial relationships that people develop with these people. I mean, the number of times, again, I don't live anywhere near Utah. I live in the Middle East. There is very little Mormon influencing here. And the number of times I have joked with friends here about like, maybe this summer we go to Utah and like go to Swig and do ketamine is not zero. And I even have a close friend here who is a Muslim woman who a couple of summers ago, because these Mormon influencers that she did not even realize were Mormons. This is actually even before the show came out, but some of these same people, when she was in the States one summer, went pretty significantly out of her way to drive to Swig because she had been influenced to believe that, and she is a huge Swig fan still and talks about it as like a wonderful experience in her life. It's like some people, go to the Grand Canyon, and she went to Swig. And so I do think it is wild, like the level of reach that they have on that. And also the number of people who, one of the things I was scrolling, getting ready for this, the people who have these relationships to them, there's a whole subreddit for the secret lives of Mormon wives. And the people who are on there talking about these people like they're their friends, right? Like that, like they are invested in their lives the same way I'm invested in my sister's life. Right? Like, do we really think this is the right decision for her? Should Taylor be the next bachelorette? Is she ready? Is she emotionally ready? Has she done the work? Things like that I think is really fascinating and does lean a little bit more to the idea that, like, there is a cult leader vibe to some extent for some of these women. And again, are you team Demi? Are you team Taylor? Are you, team Michaela? Yeah.
The global influence of these Mormon influencers is influencer and influences is it gets a little tripped up in language. But one of the weirdest moments in my life, I'm a big Twilight fan, and reading I Am Malala and reading about Malala reading Twilight, and Stephanie Meyer being an LDS author, and seeing how culture that is created in this one spot changes behavior and creates this like global culture. There is something really, really fascinating that happens there. And I'm not sure how that then reflects back on how people view the church or not, or whether it just creates a fandom related to vampires, or if it creates an interest in these soda shops. Does that then translate to how people view the religion? Because they may not always be aware of the relationship of any of these places to Mormonism.
It totally blows my mind that these women have this kind of influence, and the fact that they have this influence, from what I can tell, because of the way they show their bodies and do dance moves. Like, this seems to be like the attraction or the compulsion to watch seems to be about their beauty, their sexualized presentations, their movements. And that I just don't know what to make of this, especially if we go back to that question of empowerment for a second. Like, I love the fact that these women have money, because money allows them to make choices. Layla divorces her husband at 22 and she has children. I don't know if she could have made that choice if she was just a regular LDS mom in Utah that did not have access to funds through this kind of stuff she does on Mom Talk. So it's so tangled in my mind, like the amount of influence, the way they're getting it through their bodies. At least this is my interpretation. And it does make me want to talk and ask you guys a little bit more about beauty culture and what is happening in this show and on Mom Talk in this presentation of beauty, this emphasis on beauty. So for me, this does not feel feminist. Like this does not feel empowering if you have your power through the way you present your body and move your body. I don't know. I have lots of feelings. I have some feelings about this. And I was wondering if you could reflect on how you make sense of the beauty presentation, the focus on it, and also how, like, where on earth are, like, say, typical LDS cultural values of humility, of service, of inner virtue, of the good kind of modesty, not the shoulder kind of, not the clothing kind of modesty, but the modesty of not thrusting yourself out there and screaming to people, look at me, look at me, look at me. Like, how is this all working together? Is it simply not working together? Those ideals are not part of these women's lives. This kind of typical salt of the earth LDS ideals. Anyway, thoughts about beauty culture, the way they present, the Botox, the lip fillers, all this stuff. Love to hear your perspectives.
One thing that I appreciate is the transparency and honesty about the procedures that they are participating in. And some of that relates to their influence of advertising for the companies that they go get this stuff done. They may either get a discount, get it free, if they bring along their following to see these places. But I have watched as some of them, specifically Whitney recently, as part of her Dancing with the Stars, she was like, come with me to get my nails done, ready for this next episode. And she lists all the things that she's had done in the last couple of years. And I'm like, that is a level of honesty and transparency about the work that it takes to look like this that we don't see with a lot of celebrities. I think there's, a lot of celebrities who want to pretend they haven't had any work done, that, that feeling of I woke up this way, or they try and minimize. And the honesty and transparency, I think, is helpful, but I don't think it conflicts with ideals. I think it shows how ideals play on the ground, because while there is like that more humility, modesty side, there is a lot of pressure for Mormon women who do not typically, if they are living what was taught for a long time of like being a stay-at-home mom, they don't have access to financial means, and their currency then becomes their ability to attract and maintain a husband who can support them. And so statements from church leaders about things like, well, if an old barn needs a coat of paint, like and like, Mormon women, why don't you make yourself look a little bit better and you might find a spouse. And that, those are messages that I grew up with and that these women grew up with. And this is what it then can look like to live what was taught to you as the expectation. What is the highest aspiration for a Mormon woman? To attract a man who they can marry in a temple.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Katie, I also grew up with all that as well. Like, I felt an enormous pressure as a teenager to be as beautiful as I could. It was a lot. I was trained in my Mormon culture to think a lot about how I looked. Because the idea was, and I remember the fear was, if I am not pretty enough, how am I going to get married? And so it was very much like and if I don't get married, my gosh, can I support myself? How will I, because I wasn't trained to think of myself as capable of going out into the world and making a great career for myself and buying my own house and, living a wonderful life. That was not modeled for me. So I love the point you just made there, Katie, about how we were fed even though we have these other Mormon ideals out there about humility and the good kind of modesty and stuff, we were also fed a lot of messages about our roles in this world to be wives and mothers. And the way you get there is you need to attract a man and you need to keep that man and look really good. And so I think what we see in some of these factions of Utah culture, I think maybe we see the logical end game of this kind of messaging.
Yeah, I don't think any of this is new. I think there's always been a subculture of women who have been on the wealthier side and who have been. I mean, the number of people who I knew who, they would finish having kids and then they'd have, the mommy makeover, right? Where you get a tummy tuck and you get a boob job. And it's essentially, in my mind, I mean, given just the rates of plastic surgery in Utah too, like I think there is almost an expectation that comes up with the perfectionist culture, that if you have the money for this, then that is absolutely an appropriate use of those funds, and almost a should, not even just a could, that you should be doing your best to maintain that. This is part of like being perfect, is you're going to use that money to, make sure that you're not aging or,
It's almost
showing
like
signs of aging.
almost
Go
like a
ahead.
prosperity gospel, like on your body.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think it's worth bringing in that these are essentially gender affirming surgeries, which are allowed for women that are not allowed for people who are non-binary or trans, or that if somebody were to have a gender affirming surgery that would make them look less like the gender assigned at birth, according to churches like standards, that could put them at risk for excommunication. And that can put them at risk for, social and cultural ostracism. And it's very dangerous right now, this culture, for trans individuals. It is not, within the church and within broader American culture, this is not a safe time for a lot of trans individuals. And yet, for Mormon women and women in general, gender affirming surgery is not only okay, but it can help you look more like the ideal that is presented to you by your religious leaders.
That is such a good point. Yeah, and it brings to mind, there's been past work that people have done analyzing modesty or dress discourse in LDS culture throughout the decades. And I remember reading one, and I wish I remembered the title and author offhand, but it was about some of the rules of BYU in terms of what you could wear. And of course, for a long time, women couldn't even wear pants because, yes, you were supposed to look, you're like very much like falling into ideals of femaleness. You're supposed to look like a female. Pants were not at that point coded as female, so women weren't allowed to wear pants. But you could wear tight sweaters, because that's going to show off your boobs, and looking like a woman, that's what you're supposed to be doing. So I think you made such a good point there, Katie, about how gender affirming surgeries are great in LDS culture if it's women trying to look like women. But man, if you're assigned a different sex at birth, it's not going to go well for you if you try to cross those boundaries. That's a great point.
Maybe that kind of can bring us to talking about the way the show has such a narrow view and narrow idea, not only about like femininity, but racial homogeny, which is real. I mean, Utah is a very white state, but it's not as white as is depicted on the show, and the gender diversity of the show is near non-existent. The way queer culture is non-present, despite the presence of a type of queerness. I mean, the show opens with this swinger scandal, which is sort of taken as a granted that this is like, well, of course this is a scandal, because this performance of any type of non-traditional monogamy, non-traditional sexuality is scandalous, just like at its heart. That's the way the show is framing it, and seemingly has no interest in questioning that, but does flirt with it. The show knows, and the women know, Taylor and her bestie, I forget her name in season 2, Miranda. Yeah. They talk about how they had these experiences, and they don't talk about it in this awful way. They sort of allude that, like, oh yeah, those times that we kissed, that we were intimate. They're not saying like, forgive us, Bishop, for we have sinned. They are sort of just like, well, it was clearly controversial for so many reasons, but so yeah, so they nod to it, and I think that is part of the performative titillation of the show, of mom talk, to be on that edge of queer, but without actually embracing that this could be a valid part of their identities.
And there's homophobia within the show. In season 2, part of the storyline is about Layla, who says she has not been able to orgasm with a partner. And so Demi hosts a sex party to be able to, like, hopefully, break some taboos and help Layla figure out how to get there with a partner. Or I don't know how much they don't really even address about, like, with yourself. But they bring in some specialist who brings in lots of different sex toys, and the women dress in lingerie, and they have a lot of awkwardness, a lot of giggling. It's very uncomfortable for Mormon women to talk openly about sex. But Demi states, like, I'm so straight, it's scary, and makes comments that are judgmental about Taylor having had any type of sexual experiences with other women. And so there is this boundary policing, that I can host a party where we are going to look and talk about, look at sex toys, experience sensation, but we cannot acknowledge or accept as acceptable sexual feelings towards somebody of the same gender. Like, that is where the line is drawn.
Yeah, and Daniel, you mentioned the homogeneity issue, not just with monogamy and heterosexuality. Like you said, though, there is, like, kind of dancing on some of these queer issues or topics, but I was struck by, like, the racial makeup, and yes, there is, like, there's a little bit like Layla, and Jen is half Latin American, it seems.
Mhm.
So there's a little bit, but they all look exactly the same, which is so fascinating, that, like, the homogeneity in terms of presentation, no matter what the race, even though, by far absolutely dominated white, was also really interesting and a little distressing. But maybe this is this just a reflection of Utah culture, and maybe we shouldn't expect anything else in terms of presentation. Would that be how you kind of would assess the homogeneity?
I mean, I think it's reflective of who's able to get ahead in Utah culture
Mm.
in a lot of ways. It's going to be, white people with wealthy parents, as near as I can tell. Most of the people, except for Jen, who mentioned that her mom is cleaning houses, but married into what seems to be a very wealthy family. It seems like just about everybody comes from money or has made money, all these different, it does feel like those are the kinds of people who have the avenues to success, right? The safety nets that enable them to take the risks, and, the seed money or whatever to help them succeed, that enables them to have, the time or the ability to take the risk to be an influencer, as opposed to having something that, reliably gives them health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So the sexual ethics and surveillance culture of Mormonism related to garments and related to sexual activity can make women very vulnerable. And Macy Neely just came out with her book, I Told You So, where she talks about being a BYU tennis player and being in an abusive relationship because having had sexual experiences with this partner meant he knew he could turn her in and get her expelled and have her lose her scholarship and her place on the team. And so it kept her trapped in a dangerous situation for a time. And I do kind of want to touch on how some of this empowerment is moving outside of the systems that leave you vulnerable if you have a sexual experience.
One thing I also wanted to bring up is the relational dynamics between these women, the jealousy, the exclusion, the ranking. It's all really interesting because it seems very much to contrast, in my mind, to one of the best parts of Mormonism, which is the sisterhood, the support, the rooting on your friends, the celebrating the successes of your friends. But that is not always apparent on this show. It's much more clawing for power and for rank. And so I was wondering if you could comment on what does the show say about this part of Mormon womanhood, this relationality between women and the culture of Mormonism. Is what these women demonstrate on the show, is this actually getting to something in Mormon culture where there are some of these dynamics of competition? Or is it like just a complete contrast to your experience and your ideals of what it means to be a sister within Mormonism?
I mean, the dynamic of women scrambling over scraps and crumbs of power is a very familiar dynamic to me within Mormonism. I mean, even just like if you see the Relief Society reorganized, right? And someone is made Relief Society president who you feel like is not performing Mormonism in the way that you think they should to have that kind of position. Or, so-and-so got asked to work with the youth, or all these different things. I think there is a certain amount of access to power and resources feeling very tenuous. I think that is something that's really baked into our culture. And so I think there is a certain amount of, I don't love the reference, but like crabs in a bucket a little bit of if I can't have it, you can't have it. Or like, and you see that too with the policing of how people are and aren't supposed to show up, whether they are commenting on, people's videos or on their Instagram posts or whatever. I do think there's a certain amount of, you need to play by these rules so that your access to power and resources is legitimized. And otherwise, I'm going to have an issue with that.
Yeah, Celeste M. Davis on her Substack, I think it's called Matriarchy Report, had an interesting analysis about this aspect of the show, where she said the real secret is the internalized misogyny. And part of that, though, is not just the critiquing and crabs in a bucket type feel of the social dynamics there, but is also the efforts the women go through to protect the reputations of their men. And we see this with Jen and Zach pretty strongly, that Zach in the first season reflects some pretty bad behavior, I would say, in misogyny towards his wife, and how much she tries, and you can hear her even whispering in her confessional interviews with like the producer about like, can we say this, can we not, and in her protecting what the other girls think, like, well, I hope this doesn't change your opinion of him, and like this over explaining of bad behavior of men in order to protect the reputation of them, but not that level of concern about their own reputation. That it is okay for their name to be dragged through the mud, but we still must look at their Mormon husband or their partner, whether they're currently Mormon or not, and not let the men's behavior change our opinion of them. But there's so much in season 2, this throwing around the word accountability, that this pressure, this assumption that we all get to hold everyone accountable for everything and let their actions change how we think about them. We apply that to women and not to men.
Oh my, yeah, I love everything you both just said there, because so for me, like and I think maybe this is why this show does not seem like Mormon feminism to me, because my experience with Mormon feminism, and of course I've been in the lovely soft embrace of Exponent 2 for the last 25 years, where this was like, sisterhood is about supporting each other and celebrating each other and being kind to one another. I know there might be spits and spats here, but largely that's what it's felt like to me. And so these dynamics that I see playing out on this show feel very much certainly not like Mormon feminism, and honestly, not a lot like, say, my ward experience. But Liz, after you mentioned, that there's always a little bit of like kind of, yeah, a little bit of back talk, or I hate to use the word murmur, but you know what I'm talking about. When certain women get promoted to certain positions, you're totally right. It totally happens. So I think that's a really excellent point. And Katie, yeah, I think you put such an important frame on it, especially with noticing that internalized misogyny and how it's the men that are getting protected, but the ladies are trashing each other. So such a great point.
I think for decades now, generations, there are Mormon men who from the church get a lot of resources that give them particular leadership skills and leadership training. Starting, with Boy Scouts and on, where there's so many like priesthood leadership training sessions that women are excluded from and not included to. And the people who come in to do these trainings may be church leaders, but they're also people who've had a lot of resources invested in them from businesses and from the church to teach them additional leadership skills that women get completely cut out of. And so when women start their own organizations, there's often so much scrambling and learning as you go without professional leadership skills having been taught to them. And I think we see this kind of reflected in that dynamic of so much infighting that is done publicly and messily, when with additional leadership skills and training, you might see more finesse to protecting each other collectively for a shared goal.
Maybe to wrap up, we can frame all of this in terms of a Mormon moment, the Mormon moment, this Mormon moment. What might the next wave Mormon moment be? I mean, I feel like the show is capitalizing clearly on the cultural fascination with the quirks of Mormonism, but also the complexity, the dialectical, like both ands of Mormonism. But I wonder what might the next iteration of this be? What other secret lives are there to see within Mormonism broadly?
I think the one I have expected to see that I haven't seen yet is some sort of trad wife type homeschooling mom Mormonism, like secret lives of, we have Ballerina Farm on Instagram, but something kind of more along that, something that almost feels like it would show up in opposition to shows like The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives or The Real Housewives. Something that is meant to show something more traditionally conservative, maybe politically conservative. One thing that does strike me about this show is how little politics ever comes up at all. In fact, I can't think of a time in this show that politics have come up at all. I don't know anything about the politics of any of these people. I think I have like guesses and assumptions, but I would be curious to see something that is a little bit more, back to basics and like prairie girl aesthetic, as opposed to something more modern and traditionally capitalist as mom talk.
Well, and that's so interesting that you frame it as the prairie girl aesthetic, because it still is a performance of a particular type of womanhood and Mormonism, if you're going to lean into that trad wife culture. Because even when you have people like Phyllis Schlafly, who led that movement against the Equal Rights Amendment and stopped taking our privileges, she got a law degree and had run for office and had worked in Washington, D.C. and was not like, she was a Catholic mother of many children, but she was not living that trad stay-at-home wife life that she was advocating for other women. And you have Ballerina Farm, who, yes, she does have, I think, 8 children at this point, but is also running a multi-million-dollar empire and is presenting a particular type of motherhood that most people will never have access to. And so if you were to lean into that triad wife aesthetic with a show and exposing more secret lives, it is propaganda of a perspective that is not related to the lives that are left vulnerable if women do not have an education and do not have any financial security. And so to what ends is the culture served when you present a particular aesthetic? Who benefits? And is it structural equality? Is it individual empowerment? Is it a particular political party?
Well, yeah, those are huge questions. And I think in a way they kind of get to the heart of why shows like this are so fascinating and interesting, because they touch on all these really interesting questions. Thank you, Katie and Liz and Daniel, for coming on today. This was a really illuminating experience for me. I love the lenses you all applied and all your fantastic commentary. And to our listeners, thank you very much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please do share it with friends or colleagues, and don't forget to leave us a review or to get in touch with us with any comments or questions. We hope you will tune in for future episodes. This is Caroline Kline
And Daniel Foster Smith.
Until next time.
Greetings. My name is Rebecca DeSchweinitz, and I'm thrilled to serve as a board member at the Dialogue Foundation and as one of the hosts of Dialogue Gospel Study. In each episode, which we record live the second and fourth Sunday of every month, we welcome esteemed speakers from a variety of backgrounds to share their insights and perspectives on the Come Follow Me lessons. Our aim is to spark meaningful conversations about the scriptures, to connect them to our personal experiences and to our understandings and explorations of the gospel. To stay in the loop with our upcoming lessons and this opportunity to engage with Mormon thought, culture, and belief, be sure to visit dialoguejournal.com and sign up for our newsletter. By doing so, you'll receive updates and timely links to join our live stream lessons. Additionally, you can catch up on our past guests and episodes by subscribing to Dialogue Journal on YouTube, Facebook, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Dialogue Podcast Network.